The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the nearly empty office, casting a pale glow over the rows of unused desks and glass-walled conference rooms. Outside the tall windows, the city pulsed with distant life, but on the 38th floor of Cruz Foundation Media, everything felt muted, suspended in a quiet that pressed in on Alina Cruz's chest. She sat at her desk with perfect posture, shoulders squared, hands folded neatly in front of her keyboard as if someone might still be watching. Alina had learned early that invisibility was safest. At 25, she had mastered the art of being present without being noticed. She arrived early, left late, spoke only when spoken to, and never made mistakes that drew attention. In a building owned by powerful men whose names were never spoken too loudly, that discipline had kept her employed and protected. Tonight, though, her hands trembled. Her phone lay on the desk beside her, the screen glowing faintly in the dim office. On it was a black-and-white image that had changed everything. A small, curved shape, barely recognizable as human, yet undeniably alive. The technician's voice still echoed in her ears from earlier that day, bright and casual, pointing out a tiny flicker on the screen. A heartbeat, strong, steady. Alina pressed her lips together, fighting the wave of nausea that rose again, this time from fear rather than morning sickness. She had gone to the appointment alone, just like she did everything else. No family in the city, no partner to hold her hand, just a borrowed lunch break, a paper cup of water, and a truth she hadn't known how to carry back into the world. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. There was only one person she trusted enough to tell, one person who knew about that night 3 months ago, the night she had promised herself would never matter. Lucia. Her best friend since college, the only one who knew how careful Alina always was, how out of character it had been to let her guard down at all. Alina opened the message thread, her eyes blurring as she attached the ultrasound photo. Her chest tightened as she typed, the words spilling out faster than she could second-guess them. I need you, please call me. The test was positive. I'm 12 weeks. I'm terrified. Her finger hovered for a heartbeat, then she hit send. The message vanished with a soft whoosh. Alina exhaled shakily and leaned back in her chair, pressing a hand to her stomach as if she could shield the tiny life inside her from the weight of what she had just done. For a moment, the office was silent again, empty, safe. Then her phone vibrated. Alina frowned, glancing down instinctively. Maybe Lucia was still awake. Maybe she'd respond right away. Relief bloomed for half a second before her vision tunneled and her blood ran cold. The name at the top of the screen was not Lucia. Dominic Morty. Her heart slammed so hard it hurt. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the desk, the vibration buzzing against the wood like a warning. Alina stared at it, frozen, her breath coming shallow and fast. No, she must have clicked the wrong contact. She must have saved the number wrong. She reached for the phone with shaking hands and turned the screen toward her. Delivered. Her stomach dropped. Across the city, in a warehouse that smelled of oil, metal, and fear, Dominic Morty stood surrounded by men who did not dare to speak unless spoken to. One man knelt on the concrete floor, blood running from a split lip, his hands bound behind his back. Another held a gun loosely at his side, waiting for a nod. Dominic's phone vibrated in his hand. He almost ignored it. Almost. Then he glanced down. The image loaded slowly, the poor signal struggling against thick walls and reinforced steel. When it finally appeared, Dominic felt something inside him crack, sharp and sudden. The noise in the room faded. The kneeling man ceased to exist. The gun might as well have been a child's toy. All Dominic could see was the image on his screen. An ultrasound. A life. For a long moment, he did not breathe. Memories surged up unbidden, a gala night months ago. Low music, dim lights, champagne he rarely drank. Alina, quiet, observant, the way she had looked at him without fear, without calculation, the way she had said his name like he was just a man, not a legend whispered in back rooms, one night, controlled, careful, real. His grip tightened around the phone. The date on the image aligned perfectly in his mind, calculating faster than any machine. His jaw clenched, his pulse thundered in his ears, not with anger alone, but something far more dangerous. Possession, protection, fury. The men around him shifted uneasily as Dominic straightened, the air in the room changing instantly. He slipped the phone into his pocket with deliberate calm and rose to his full height, every movement precise. "Get him out of my sight," he said quietly. No one questioned him. As the room emptied, Dominic stood alone, staring at nothing, his thoughts circling one relentless question. If the child was his, why had she never told him? Dominic Morty did not sleep that night, and when the city outside began to pale from black to gray, he was still standing in the same place, staring out through reinforced glass. As if the skyline itself might answer him, the warehouse had been cleaned hours ago, the blood washed away, the men dismissed, the silence left behind thick and restless. He held the phone again, now the screen dark, but the image burned into his mind with brutal clarity, a child-a heartbeat, a truth that had arrived without permission. And refused to live. He replayed the night again and again, not as a fantasy, not softened by time, but exactly as it had been. Alina, quiet, but steady, the way she met his eyes without lowering hers, the way she spoke when spoken to, and never filled space with noise. She had not chased him, had not lingered, had not asked for anything that alone had made her unforgettable in his world. Women either wanted protection, money, power, or proximity. Alina had wanted nothing, and that terrified him now more than any rival ever had. By sunrise, he had already ordered the city to move, not loudly, not violently, but with surgical precision. Men who owed him favors were contacted, cameras were checked, files pulled, names traced. Alina Cruz emerged on his tablet, not as a threat, not as leverage, but as a pattern. Discipline, 2 degrees, night shifts, no scandals, no family nearby, a studio apartment far from the districts that belonged to him. She lived carefully, as if the world might punish her for taking too much space. His jaw tightened. She had been carrying his child alone. The thought settled in his chest like a weight and a spark at the same time. Rage rose, first sharp and instinctive, not at her, but at the idea of her unprotected in a city that devoured the careless. Then came something colder, more dangerous, resolve. Dominic Morty did not abandon his blood, and if the child was his, then Alina was under his protection, whether she wanted it or not. Still, he did not rush to her door. Power taught patience. He knew fear could shatter trust faster than bullets. He needed to see her not as a boss, not as a predator, but as a man who knew something had gone wrong. Alina arrived at work that morning unaware that every step she took was being measured. She wore the same neutral clothes, muted colors, hair pulled back, no makeup, beyond what professionalism demanded. She felt watched, but told herself it was nerves, the wrong message, the long night, the silence afterward. It all sat heavy in her chest. She checked her phone twice before the elevator doors opened, half expecting to see his name again. Nothing. At her desk, she tried to focus on reports, on numbers, on tasks that once grounded her, but her hands would not stop shaking. She kept hearing the technician's voice again, heartbeat strong, and then the echo of that message flying into the wrong hands. Oh, she did not see him at first. Dominic entered the office without announcement, no entourage, no noise, just presence, conversations, thinned keyboards, slowed breaths caught, heads bowed, not from instruction, but instinct. Alina felt it before she saw him, the shift in air, the way silence bent around a single point. He stopped a few feet from her desk and waited until she looked up. Her face drained of color. They stared at each other, the world narrowing to that small space between them. Dominic saw fear there, yes, but not guilt, not calculation. Something inside him eased even as the fire spread. "You sent me something last night," he said quietly. Her lips parted, she swallowed. I am so sorry, she said. I never meant for you to see it. It was a mistake. I was not trying to involve you. A mistake, he repeated, not unkindly. She nodded, clutching the edge of her desk. I will handle it on my own. You do not need to worry. That was when something dark flickered behind his eyes. Handle it on your own, he said slowly. You think that is possible anymore? She straightened, then steel beneath the fear. I am not asking for anything from you. He studied her, and for the first time in years, Morty felt something dangerous take hold. If the child was his, then this was no longer a question. And if she believed she could disappear with his blood inside her, then she had no idea who he was. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the heat of him. I remember that night, he said quietly. I remember you. Her breath caught. And as she stood there trembling, he asked the question that tore at him most. Why did you never tell me? Elena did not answer him right away because the truth was heavier than fear, and it pressed against her ribs until breathing hurt. She stood there with the office humming softly around them, the glass walls suddenly feeling too thin to expose Dominic's presence. Filled the space, not loud, not aggressive, but undeniable, like gravity pulling everything toward him. She had spent her whole life avoiding men like this, men whose power bent rooms and rearranged outcomes. She had promised herself that night would be sealed memory, a moment that never crossed into daylight because telling him would have meant surrendering control, and Elena Cruz had survived by never giving that away. I did not tell you, because I knew exactly who you were, she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You do not do accidents, you do not do small lives, you do not do women who can walk away. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I was afraid you would take over and call it protection. Dominic felt the words strike deeper than any insult because they were true. His entire life had been built on taking over situations. Before they became threats, on control, on outcomes. He had convinced himself it was necessary, that it kept people alive. But hearing it framed through her fear changed something inside him. He exhaled slowly, keeping his hands loose at his sides, as if even the wrong movement could prove her right. You think I would cage you? He asked quietly. Elena swallowed. I think you would not even see the cage. I think you would call it safety, and expect me to be grateful. Silence stretched thick between them. The office around them resumed its cautious rhythm. But the space they occupied remained locked. Dominic studied her, then really studied her, the exhaustion beneath her composure, the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her free hand rested unconsciously near her stomach, as if guarding something precious. His voice lowered. I am not asking for gratitude, he said. I am asking for truth. She shook her head. I do not need anything from you. I am capable. I have always been. Dominic took another step closer, stopping just short of invading her space. Capability does not cancel risk, he said. You are carrying something that changes everything. Elena flinched, and for the first time emotion cracked through her careful restraint. This is my life, she said fiercely. My body, my child. You do not get to rewrite it because of who you are. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in concentration, as if every instinct in him was fighting to obey rule he had never learned. How long have you known? He asked. 12 weeks, she said. The words felt exposed, raw. He nodded once, calculating dates, aligning memories, locking into place the night, the gala, the champagne, the quiet balcony where she had laughed softly at something. He said as if he were ordinary. The realization hit him like a blow. You went through the first trimester alone. He said it was not a question. Elena did not answer because her silence was confirmation. Dominic closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with something darker burning beneath the calm. You should not have had to, he said. She stepped back a fraction there. It is, she said, that tone, you deciding what should or should not have happened. You see why I stayed silent. His gaze sharpened. I am deciding nothing yet, he said. But I will not pretend ignorance. You sent me the proof, whether by mistake or not, and now I know, and knowing means responsibility. Elena laughed once, bitter and sharp. Responsibility to who? To me, or to your name, to your bloodline? He did not answer immediately, and that pause terrified her more than any raised voice. When he spoke again, it was slower, more deliberate. I do not claim people, Elena Cruz, he said, but I do not abandon my blood either. Her chest tightened, and the room seemed to tilt. She gripped the desk behind her to steady herself. I am not a negotiation, she said. Dominic inclined his head slightly, then neither is this. He turned and gestured toward the door. Come with me, he said we will confirm what we already suspect. With a doctor I trust after that we will talk somewhere private away from curious ears. Alina shook her head, panic surged. I did not agree to this. You do not have to agree, he replied evenly. You only have to listen for the first time. Since she sent the message, Alina realized something terrifying and irreversible had begun. And as Dominic Morty waited watching her with an intensity that made escape feel impossible, she understood that the most dangerous part was not his power, it was that he believed. This child was his, and he was already planning a future that did not include her running away. The clinic was hidden behind layers of security that never appeared on maps, a quiet building with dark glass, and no sign on the door. Alina noticed everything because fear sharpened her senses. Dominic had said nothing during the drive, his presence heavy beside her, not touching, not crowding, yet impossible to ignore. She felt like she had crossed an invisible line the moment she stepped into the car, a line where choices narrowed and consequences widened. Inside, the air smelled clean, almost sterile, but warmer than a hospital. The staff spoke softly, eyes respectful, never curious. Alina realized with a chill that they already knew who Dominic was, and what that meant. The doctor was an older man with steady hands, and a voice that did not shake when he greeted Dominic by name. He nodded once to Alina with professional calm, as if she were not standing on the edge of her life changing forever. The examination room was dimmed when the screen came alive. Alina lay back staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry, trying not to think about how alone she felt even with Dominic standing only a few steps away. The sound came first, a fast rhythmic thrum that filled the room without mercy. Her breath hitched before she could stop it, and her hand flew instinctively to her stomach. There it is, the doctor said, healthy, strong. Alina turned her head and saw Dominic watching the screen, not her. His face was unreadable, carved into stillness, but his hands had curled slowly into fists at his sides, as if he were holding himself in place. Something shifted then, not loud, not visible, but real. The room felt smaller, heavier, like the truth had weight. After the test, blood was drawn, quiet, efficient, final. The doctor spoke about timelines, confirmation, results within days. Dominic listened, absorbing every word. Alina barely heard anything beyond the rush in her ears. She felt reduced to numbers, weeks, measurements, probabilities. When they stepped back into the hallway, Dominic stopped walking. Alina nearly collided with him. He turned to face her, and for the first time since this began, his voice softened. You are not alone anymore, he said. She looked up sharply. Do not say that unless you mean it. His gaze held hers, unwavering. I do not say anything lightly. They did not return to the office. Instead, Dominic brought her to a building that did not look like a home from the outside. Reinforced steel, disguised as modern design. Inside, it was quiet, controlled, safe in a way that made Alina uneasy. He showed her a suite, separate, private, untouched. Nothing here belongs to you, he said, until you choose otherwise. Protection without possession, she thought bitterly. Days passed under watchful calm. Alina continued working, but now there were shadows near her at all times, men who did not look at her unless necessary. Dominic did not intrude, but he was always aware. Meals appeared, vitamins arranged, appointments scheduled without discussion. She felt cared for and contained at the same time. Then the whispers began. She heard them one afternoon as she passed a closed-door, voices, low, sharp, dangerous. The baby changes everything, one man said. If it is his blood, the balance shifts. Rivals will smell weakness. Another voice, colder, answered. Then we secure the asset, remove her, if necessary. The words hit Alina like ice. That night she sat alone in the suite, lights off, one hand resting over her stomach as fear settled deep and steady. Dominic Morty was not just a man anymore, he was a force, and forces did not ask permission. As she stared into the darkness, one thought echoed louder than the rest. If this child was truly his, how far would he go to protect it, and what would happen to her when protection turned into control? The safe house settled around Alina like a breath held too long, quiet, controlled, wrapped in luxury that did not ask permission but expected acceptance. She moved through the room, slowly touching nothing at first, as if the walls might close in if she claimed space. The windows were reinforced, the doors silent, the air filtered. And calm Dominic had placed her in a suite at the far end, private, separate, untouched, exactly as promised, yet the distance did not make her feel free, it made her feel observed, not watched by eyes but by intention. Every object had been chosen for comfort, every surface clean, every corner safe. And that was what frightened her most, because safety in Dominic Morty's world was never accidental. He did not come to her that first night, he did not knock, did not hover, did not demand conversation. He let silence do what pressure could not, and Alina felt it tightening with every passing hour. She lay awake, listening to the faint sounds of movement somewhere beyond her door, men shifting guards, rotating systems, clicking quietly into place. She imagined maps being redrawn with her name at the center, imagined conversations spoken in low, dangerous tones. She pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered that she would not disappear, that she would not be erased, even here. Morning brought calm like a performance. Meals arrived without a knock, vitamins arranged neatly, water chilled exactly the way she liked, though she could not remember telling anyone that she dressed and left the sweet choosing movement over fear. Dominic was in the main room reviewing documents, his posture relaxed but alert like a predator at rest. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment something passed between them, recognition, respect, restraint. He did not tell her to sit, did not comment on her choices, only asked if she had slept. She said enough. He accepted that answer. Days followed a pattern, appointments, quiet dinners, conversations that edged closer to truth without crossing it. Dominic spoke of logistics, of protection, of timing, never once calling the baby leverage or bloodline. But Alina heard the unsaid words anyway. She challenged him when she felt boxed in, when decisions appeared before consent. He listened more than she expected, sometimes changing course, sometimes holding firm. Each time he did, she learned a little more about the man beneath the myth. Then she arrived early one afternoon, returning from a medical check. She had insisted on attending alone. The house was quieter than usual, voices muted behind closed doors. She did not mean to listen, but her name pulled her attention sharp. And sudden, we cannot leave her exposed. One voice said, if rivals believe the child is his, they will come. Another answered, colder. Then we secure what matters. The woman is a variable. The air left Alina's lungs. She stepped back slowly, heart pounding, the words repeating like a sentence passed without her presence. That night fear sharpened into resolve. She sat on the edge of the bed, gripping her phone, debating whether to call her mother to confess everything or pack a bag and vanish before plans became orders. Dominic knocked, then softly once, and waited. She opened the door expecting confrontation, but found something else. He stood there without guards, without armor, just a man holding distance. I know what you heard, he said quietly. And I know what you are thinking. She did not answer. She did not have to. I fired the man who spoke those words. He continued, anyone who sees you as a variable no longer works for me. Silence stretched heavy, but different now, charged with truth. You are not an asset, Alina, you are a choice, and so is this child, whether mine or not. Her breath caught not at the words, but at the certainty behind them. She studied his face, searching for control, for calculation, and found none, only something raw and steady. I am still afraid, she admitted. He nodded, as you should be. Fear keeps you alive, but hear this. He met her gaze fully. I will not take from you to protect myself. If you ever feel caged, you leave, and no one stops you. As the door closed behind him, Alina leaned against it, shaking. She did not trust him, not yet, but for the first time since the wrong message she wondered if the cage she feared might be a door left open, waiting for her to decide whether to stay. The tension arrived before the threat ever showed its face, and Alina felt it in the way the house breathed differently, as if the walls themselves were listening. The air no longer settled at night. It hovered restless and alert. She woke before dawn more than once with her heart racing, certain that something had shifted. While she slept, Dominic had grown quieter, not distant, but focused, like a man counting moves ahead of an unseen opponent. He took calls behind closed doors, his voice low, controlled, and when he returned, his eyes held a sharpness she had not seen before. She tried to keep her routine intact, because routine was the last defense against panic. She attended her medical appointments, ate when told, rested when ordered, and argued when she felt herself shrinking. Dominic, allowed the arguments more than that he listened. But even as he did, she sensed the tightening net around them. The guards doubled shifts, unfamiliar faces appeared and disappeared. The safe house became a fortress in truth rather than design. It was during a quiet afternoon that the truth surfaced. Sharp and merciless Alina had returned early, carrying nothing but her coat, and the weight of unease. She heard voices from the inner office. The door not fully closed. Names were spoken, rival families, territories, pressure. Someone said the word council, and another answered with consequences. The baby is already a symbol. One man said, if Ashford believes Morty is compromised, he will strike publicly. The reply came measured, colder, established, distance, remove emotional leverage, secure the air before war breaks. Alina stepped back, her breath shallow, the words burning into her mind. Remove emotional leverage meant her. She did not need Dominic to say it. She had lived long enough to understand power language. That night, she packed quietly, not everything, only what mattered: clothes, documents, the small items that reminded her who she had been before the message, before the heartbeat became a weapon. She left the expensive things untouched, as if refusing to let them claim her. Dominic found the empty room before dawn. The stillness where her presence had been was louder than any alarm. He stood there long after the guards spoke his name. The reality struck him with brutal clarity. She had chosen flight because she believed he would choose power. Across the city, Alina moved through shadows, avoiding main streets, feeling every step in her bones. She did not call anyone, did not look back. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach as she whispered promises into the dark. She would not let them turn her child into a bargaining chip. She would disappear if she had to. She would be small if that kept them safe. Dominic tore through the city with a fury he had not allowed himself in years. Orders were given, alliances tested, lines crossed. He ignored protocol, abandoned appearances, and followed instinct alone. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lose control, and the lesson cut deeper than any betrayal. When he finally traced her path, the truth settled heavy in his chest. This was not about rivals or councils or legacy. This was about a woman who had trusted him enough to stay and feared him enough to leave. And as he stood in the empty street where her trail vanished, Morty understood that the real threat was not the coming war, it was the possibility that she would never believe him again. Alina moved through the city like a ghost, slipping between moments, her body heavy with exhaustion and purpose. The night swallowed her easily, rain misting the pavement, neon lights blurring as tears filled her eyes. She did not know where she was going, only where she could not stay. Every sound felt louder, every shadow sharper. She kept her head down, one hand firm over her stomach, grounding herself in the only truth that mattered: the life moving inside her. This child would not be claimed, would not be traded, would not be used. She would rather disappear than allow that. She found temporary shelter in a place that smelled of old coffee and damp walls, a borrowed room paid in cash where no one asked her name. She lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe through thin windows. Her mind replayed every word she had overheard, every pause in Dominic's voice, every silence that now felt like preparation. She told herself she had done the right thing, that leaving was strength, not fear. Still, her chest ached with a grief she did not want to name. Across the city, Dominic was unraveling in ways no one had ever witnessed. He had abandoned the careful distance that once defined him, tearing through alliances and protocols with a single-minded focus. His men followed without question because fear clung to him like heat. He did not sleep, did not eat, did not slow. He replayed her absence again and again, the untouched room, the empty air where her presence should have been. He realized too late that restraint without reassurance was still silence, and silence had driven her away. He traced her path with ruthless precision, cameras, contacts, routes. She had moved carefully, but not carefully enough for a man who built empires from fragments. When he finally found the place she was hiding, something inside him broke, not relief, not triumph, but a raw, unbearable fear. She was still within reach, and that meant she could still be lost. Alina sensed him before she saw him. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thick. She stood instinctively, backing toward the door, heart pounding. Then he was there, filling the space, not as a boss, not as a threat, but as a man stripped of armor. His suit was gone, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes dark with something close to desperation. He did not move closer, did not speak right away. He waited. I am not here to take anything from you, he said quietly. I am here because I was wrong. Her breath shook. You were planning to separate me from my child. No, he said immediately. I was planning to protect without understanding that protection can still feel like a cage. The words cost him. He did not soften them. I let men speak in my name who should never have believed they could. Tears slid down her face. Unbidden, I heard enough. And I should have known you would, he said. I should have trusted you enough to talk before the world decided for us. He stepped back, giving her space the way he should have from the beginning. If you leave now, I will not stop you, but you deserve to know this. I ended alliances, burned bridges, and declared war on anyone who saw you as leverage. She stared at him, disbelief cutting through fear. You would destroy everything. He nodded once without hesitation. I already have. The silence between them stretched thick and trembling. Elena pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the baby move, a reminder of what was at stake. She looked at Dominic and saw something she had never seen before: surrender, not weakness, but choice. I am still afraid, she whispered. So am I, he answered, and that is how I know this matters. Outside, the city roared indifferent. Inside that small room, the most powerful man Elena had ever known stood unguarded, waiting for a decision that would define them both. The place where everything finally broke open was not dramatic at first. It was ordinary, a bus terminal humming with tired voices and rolling suitcases. A place meant for leaving. Elena sat rigid on a plastic chair, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, one hand braced beneath her belly, as if she could anchor herself to the ground. The smell of diesel and stale coffee clung to the air, and every announcement echoed like a countdown. She had already bought the ticket, already chosen disappearance over danger. Love over power, fear over hope. Her heart hurt in a way that felt permanent, like something had torn and would never fully mend. Then she heard her name. Not shouted, not commanded, but fractured as if it had been ripped from somewhere deep. Dominic. Morty moved through the crowd without guards, without distance. His presence, raw and undeniable. People parted instinctively, sensing the weight of him, even stripped of authority. His face was pale, his breathing uneven, his eyes locked on her as if she were the only solid thing left in a collapsing world. When he reached her, he did something that stole the air from every chest nearby. He dropped to his knees in front of her right. There on the stained floor of the terminal, the most feared man in the city, kneeling without shame. Do not leave, he said, his voice breaking through the noise. Please. Elena stood trembling, shock freezing her in place. People stared, phones lifted, whispers spreading, but she barely saw them. All she could see was him, unarmed, unguarded. Undone. You were going to take my baby. She said the words tearing out of her like glass. You were going to reduce me to a problem you could manage. No, he said fiercely, looking up at her. I was offered that solution and I destroyed it. I fired the man who spoke it. I burned every document. I told the council that if they touched you or spoke your name again, there would be no forgiveness. I chose you, Elena, before you ever asked me to. She shook her head, tears streaming. You chose too late. He reached into his pocket slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might run, and pulled out a small velvet box. His hands shook when he opened it, revealing a simple ring, not a symbol of wealth, but of intention. I have been carrying this for weeks, he said, not knowing when I would deserve to ask. I am not asking you to stay because of power or fear or the child. I am asking because I love you, because you changed me, because you made me remember who I was before the world taught me control was safety. Silence fell around them, heavy and reverent. Dominic held the box out like an offering, like a truth laid bare. If you leave now, I will let you go, he said. I will protect you from a distance and never speak your name again. But if you stay, stay as my equal, not my possession, not my shield, but my partner. Elena's knees weakened. She pressed her palm over her heart, feeling it hammer against her ribs. She had feared this man because he could destroy worlds, but now she saw the greater truth: he could surrender his own. She looked down at him, at the man who ruled through fear, choosing vulnerability in a room full of strangers, and something inside her finally gave way. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. He stood pulling her into his arms, not claiming, not trapping, just holding her, as applause broke out around them, strangers, cheering a love they did not understand, but could feel. As Dominic rested his forehead against hers, Elena realized the shock was not the proposal or the kneeling or the crowd. The shock was that she was no longer running, and for the first time since the wrong message she felt something close to peace. The room where the truth arrived was quiet, almost gentle, and that was what made it cruel. The doctor spoke softly, explaining results, timelines, confirmations. But Elena barely heard him because Dominic had gone still beside her, not rigid, not angry, just emptied, as if something fundamental had been removed. She watched his reflection in the darkened glass, his jaw set, eyes fixed forward, and she knew before the words finished forming that everything was about to change. The baby was healthy, the doctor said. The pregnancy strong, and then the sentence that fractured the air landed with impossible weight. The paternity test excluded Dominic Morty. For a heartbeat, Elena felt relief, sharp and disorienting, followed instantly by grief she had not prepared for, because she had already let herself believe in a future that now seemed to vanish. She turned toward Dominic, bracing for anger, for withdrawal, for the quiet closing of a door. She had spent her life learning how quickly protection could become abandonment. The silence stretched, and she could feel her pulse in her throat. Dominic exhaled slowly, one hand braced on the edge of the table, grounding himself. "The child is not mine," he said, not as a question, not as disbelief, just truth acknowledged. He looked at Elena, then really looked at her, as if seeing her without the shadow of bloodlines. For the first time she waited for him to step back, to rebuild walls, to reclaim control. Instead he did something that stunned her. He reached for her hand openly, without ownership, and held it steady. "Nothing changes," he said. Her breath caught. "What?" "I meant what I said," he continued, his voice low, unwavering. "I chose you before I knew I chose you, when you stood in my world and refused to disappear. The child may not carry my blood, but that does not undo the life we have already built, or the man I became because of you." Tears spilled down her face, unrestrained now, because this was not fear, this was something else, something terrifying and beautiful. "You do not owe me anything," she whispered. He shook his head. "I am not staying because I owe you. I am staying because I want to, because for the first time in my life, I know what choice feels like, without strategy, without calculation." The world outside did not stop for them, but inside that quiet room, everything rearranged. Elena realized the true shock was not the result itself, it was what remained after. The power he held could have walked away, cleanly, reputation intact, danger avoided. He did not, he stayed. Later, when they stood alone, overlooking the city, Dominic knelt again, not in spectacle, not in desperation, but in certainty. The ring caught the light, simple, deliberate. "I am asking you, knowing the truth," he said, "not because of blood, not because of war, but because loving you has already cost me everything I was, and I would pay it again." Elena cupped his face, tears shining. She understood then that the child was never the center of this story. It was the catalyst. The test had not broken them, it had revealed them. She nodded through tears, yes, steady and real. Outside, the city roared, indifferent, but inside that moment something rare had survived. The final reveal was not that the baby was not his, it was that love did not need blood to bind it, needed choice, and Dominic Morty had made his with nothing left to hide. The war did not end in a single night, and it did not end quietly either. It unfolded the way all real endings do, slowly, painfully, and with consequences that could not be undone. Dominic Morty did not hide anymore. He stepped into the light of his own world and forced it to change around him. He faced the council without armor, without lies, and without apology. He made it clear that there would be no bargaining with lives, no turning children into leverage, no using women as shields. Those who challenged him learned quickly that the man who chose love was far more dangerous than the one who ruled by fear. Elena watched from the edges, at first carrying both awe and uncertainty, as she saw the syndicate bend not to violence, but to resolve. Dominic dismantled alliances that thrived on cruelty and elevated those who understood restraint. The empire shifted shape, quieter, cleaner, and still powerful enough to survive. Those who could not adapt disappeared into irrelevance or prison cells built by their own greed. Through it all, Dominic never once pushed her forward, never demanded her presence at meetings, or asked her to play a role. She was not a symbol or a trophy, she was his partner by choice. And that distinction changed everything. She spoke when she wanted, withdrew when she needed, and rebuilt her own sense of safety piece by piece. The child grew strong inside her, a constant reminder that life was not something to be owned, but something to be protected. The birth came on a morning washed in pale light. Elena labored long and hard, and Dominic never left her side. Not once. He held her through pain, through fear, through moments where she thought she could not go on. When the baby finally arrived, crying and fierce and alive, Dominic wept openly. Unashamed, the child was placed in Elena's arms, and Dominic wrapped himself around them both, as if anchoring a truth he never wanted to lose. He did not claim the child by blood, he claimed the child by devotion. He signed papers, stood before witnesses, and declared his choice with a steadiness that left no room for doubt. This was his family, not because of lineage, but because of love. They married quietly, without spectacle, without crowds. Elena wore a simple dress. Dominic wore no weapons, no symbols of power, just a ring and a promise. The vows were spoken low and real, witnessed only by those who mattered. When Dominic took her hands, he did not promise safety from the world, he promised honesty, presence, and choice every single day. Years later, the city would still whisper his name, but differently now. They spoke of a man who changed the rules without burning everything down, of a woman who walked into danger and refused to disappear, of a child raised not in fear, but in strength. The legacy Dominic Morty left behind was not built in blood or silence, it was built in the courage to choose love when power offered easier paths. Elena sometimes thought back to the wrong message, the single mistake that cracked open two guarded lives. She understood now that it was never an accident, it was the moment truth found its way through control, through fear, through everything that kept them apart. Their story did not end with peace or perfection. It continued with daily decisions, midnight feedings, hard conversations, and quiet mornings where love felt earned. And in those ordinary moments, Elena knew something with absolute certainty. The most powerful thing Dominic Morty had ever done was not ruling an empire or winning a war, it was choosing to stay, choosing to love, and choosing to build a family not from obligation, but from the courage to begin again.